She was broke, grieving, and one eviction notice away from the street. He was one of New York's most powerful men, and she had just dumped an entire dessert tray on his lap. Most people would have been fired on the spot. Instead, he handed her a business card and said, "Call me tomorrow, noon. Don't be late." What he offered her next would change everything. $300,000, 5 days, and one impossible secret to keep. But no one warned her that the hardest part wouldn't be the lying. It would be the moment she stopped wanting to. Welcome to this channel, where we tell stories of powerful men, unexpected love, and the quiet strength of the human heart. Family, loyalty, second chances. This is where those stories live. This story reminds us that sometimes the worst night of your life is quietly setting up the best chapter. If this story moves you, hit like and drop your city in the comments. It means the world to us and helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next.
For Arya, the city lights blurred through the bus window. At 23, she felt ancient. An envelope in her pocket held another final notice. Her father's death had left her with memories and a mountain of debt. The life insurance he promised was gone. He had used the money for her college textbooks, but she had to drop out to survive. Now she worked at Lumineer, a restaurant where the customers wore watches worth more than she made in a year. She pushed through the doors on Christmas Eve, a night for the rich to celebrate. The kitchen was frantic. Arya put on her apron and saw the dark circles under her own eyes in a reflection. Grief and stress had made her thin. Simone, another waitress, rushed past. "Table 12 is here," she whispered. "They look important." Arya grabbed her notepad and walked into the dining room. The room glowed under crystal chandeliers. It smelled of wealth and roasted duck. Table 12 was by the window. 4 men sat in expensive suits. 3 were laughing, full of confidence. The 4th man sat quietly, his dark eyes watching the room with an intensity that made her nervous. She approached with a forced smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with a drink?" One man ordered a Macallan 25 without looking at her. Another wanted the same. She had learned not to expect politeness. "And for you, sir?" she asked the quiet one. His eyes met hers, and the impact was startling. They were the color of dark espresso, and he examined her carefully, as if she were a puzzle. He looked to be in his early 30s, with a jawline that seemed carved from stone. A small scar split his left eyebrow. "Water," he said. His voice was quiet and controlled. Still, no ice. The 4th man ordered the most expensive bourbon. Arya nodded, feeling the quiet man's eyes follow her as she left. He was not looking at her like the others did, not just as a servant. He was studying her. At the bar, Thomas the bartender whistled. "That is $300 a glass." The amount made her stomach tighten. $600 for 2 drinks was more than a month's rent for her. It was enough to let her breathe for just a moment. The night continued in a blur of orders and aching feet. She kept her smile fixed, even as she felt exhausted. The men at table 12 ordered the most expensive food. The loud ones drank more and more. The quiet man, however, barely touched his water, but his eyes never stopped watching her. It was not creepy, but it was unnerving. He seemed to be calculating something she could not understand. "Miss." One of the men snapped his fingers at her like she was a pet. "We need dessert." Arya fought to keep her professional smile. "Of course. What can I get for you?" "Bring us one of everything," the man said with a wave. "And more drinks. But not for Dante here. He does not know how to have fun." So the quiet one was named Dante. His jaw tightened at his friend's comment, but he remained silent. "One of everything," Arya confirmed. "I will bring it right out." The kitchen was a disaster. It was Christmas Eve, and they were terribly short-staffed. Arya loaded the heavy dessert tray, her hands trembling from exhaustion. The display of sweets was a beautiful work of art that would cost a fortune. The dessert tray felt heavier than her weekly grocery budget. It was a clumsy load, but she was behind, and the couple at table 7 glared at her. She had navigated this narrow kitchen hall 1,000 times. Every server knew the dance. But Marcus rushed the corner, not looking. The crash was instant. Time slowed as expensive desserts sailed through the air. A chocolate souffle exploded on the carpet. Tiramisu splattered next. But the worst was the creme brulee. It flew in a perfect arc, landing upside down on the lap of a man in an immaculate suit. It landed on Dante. The sugar crust shattered, and yellow custard pooled on his trousers. The entire restaurant stared. Arya stood frozen, holding the empty tray. Her voice was a bare whisper. "I am so sorry." Dante rose slowly, custard dripping from his suit. His face was a mask. His dark eyes locked on hers, and she wished the floor would swallow her whole. His friends were silent. "I will pay for it," Arya said, knowing she could not afford even the dry cleaning. "Excuse us," Dante said, not to her, but to his companions. "I need to handle this." He walked toward her, and every nerve screamed for her to run. She was glued to the floor, certain she was about to be fired. He stopped right in front of her, tall and broad-shouldered. He reached into his jacket, and she held her breath. He pulled out a simple business card. Just a name, Dante Morelli, and a number. "Call me tomorrow," he said. He pressed the card into her hand. "Noon. Do not be late." Then he was gone, leaving Arya in a dessert disaster zone. In the manager's office, Gerald looked exhausted. "I should fire you," he said. "Do you know who that was?" "A customer," she mumbled. "That was Dante Morelli. His family practically owns Manhattan. And you threw dessert on him. It was an accident. Marcus has worked here for 5 years without an incident." Gerald sighed. "Look, I know about your father, but I cannot have you attacking the clientele." "I understand." She would have fired herself. "I will get my things." "Wait," Gerald said. "Morelli paid for his entire table. He paid for everything you destroyed. And he left a tip for your whole section." Gerald pushed a check toward her. "He said this was for you." Arya stared at the check for $2,000, made out in her name. This was impossible. It felt like a trap. "I cannot take this. You can and you will. I am not telling one of New York's most powerful men his money is no good. You are on probation," he told her. "One more mistake, and you are gone." The check felt hot in her pocket on the bus ride home. $2,000. It was more money than she had seen in years. But it came with a condition. "Call me tomorrow. Noon." Rich men did not give waitresses their private number unless they wanted something. Still, he had been oddly professional. Her building was dark. She climbed 3 flights of stairs past the broken elevator. An eviction notice was taped to her door. She sat on her bed and stared at Dante's business card. It was thick, expensive paper. The smart choice was to throw it away, cash the check, and just be grateful. She needed to survive. But she was already drowning in debt. In 6 months, she would be on the street. "Call me tomorrow, noon." What more could she possibly lose? Arya lay awake all night, listening to the city sirens. At sunrise, she knew what she had to do. It was Christmas morning. While other families gathered around trees, Arya Bennett was facing a mountain of debt with only a stranger's business card for hope. At 11:59, she finally dialed his number. He answered immediately. "Arya Bennett." It was a statement, not a question. "Mr. Morelli," she answered, her voice trembling. He was direct. "A car would be there in 1 hour. Be ready." Before she could ask where they were going, he hung up. Her heart pounded, telling her to run, but her desperation was stronger. She pulled out her only decent dress, a simple navy sheath she wore to her father's funeral. It was loose on her now. With uncooperative hair and a quick swipe of drugstore mascara, she looked exactly like what she was. a broke girl trying to hide it. The car that arrived at 1 o'clock was not a taxi. It was a gleaming black town car with a uniformed driver who treated her like she was someone special. The inside smelled like new leather and money. As they drove, her rundown neighborhood melted away into pristine streets with giant houses. He stopped in front of a magnificent limestone building that looked like a palace. The driver opened her door and said, "Penthouse. They are expecting you." Inside, the lobby was all marble and mirrors. A silent elevator operator took her up 40 floors. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a breathtaking apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. It was an entirely different world filled with priceless art and perfect cream-colored furniture. Dante Morelli stood by the window, his back to her. He was dressed simply in dark slacks and a white shirt, but he radiated power. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a sofa that probably cost more than her entire life's earnings. She sat on the very edge, feeling completely out of place. He got straight to the point. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "But first, I need to know. Can you keep a secret?" Every instinct in her body screamed that this was a bad idea. "That depends on the secret," she replied. A small smile touched his lips. "I am offering you a significant amount of money for a service. This service requires absolute discretion. If you cannot provide that, you can leave now." Her mouth went dry. "What kind of service?" He leaned in, his dark eyes locking on hers. "The acting kind. I need a wife." "For 5 days," he explained calmly. "You will play the part of my wife at my family's Christmas gathering." His tone was all business. "In return, I will pay you $300,000. The number was like a punch to the gut. $300,000. It was enough to wipe out her debt and start a new life. "Why me?" she asked, motioning to her simple dress. "You could hire a professional." "Because you need the money," he said bluntly. "That means you will be convincing, and because last night you showed integrity when you made a mistake. You tried to fix it instead of making excuses." The idea was absurd. "You want to pay me to lie and you call it integrity?" "I need someone who will honor our agreement," he said, his voice firm, "even when it becomes difficult, and believe me, it will become difficult." He described his family as complicated. His reasons for needing a pretend wife were his own. He knew exactly how desperate her situation was, and strangely, that was a relief. There was no need to pretend she was fine. "There are rules," he continued. "First, you tell no one. Second, you must be convincing, because my family will look for any flaw." He paused, and his expression grew dark. "Third, and most important, you must never be alone with any of the men in my family. This is not negotiable." A chill ran down her spine. "Why is that a rule?" she asked. "It is a necessary rule," he said flatly. "For your protection." "Some of my male relatives do not respect boundaries," he said. "Break that rule, and I cannot guarantee your safety." The casual way he said it was terrifying. "What kind of family are you from?" she whispered. "The kind with money and power," he answered, "and very little oversight." He warned her that it would not be a vacation. His family would test her and question her. They had only today to prepare, as the 5-day event started tomorrow. The whole thing was completely insane. It was also the only lifeline she had been offered. "If I say yes," Arya said, finding a strength she did not know she possessed, "I want a contract, with every single term in writing." Dante smiled, and for a moment, his handsome face looked warm. "I already have one prepared." He brought over a folder. "Read this carefully." The contract was simple. She would act as his wife for 5 days at a family event. The payment was $300,000. The rules were clear. Tell no one, be believable, and stay away from male relatives. One clause gave her pause. It mentioned physical affection, like holding hands or brief hugs, might be needed. Anything more required clear consent from both of them. I will not touch you without permission, Dante said softly. But we have to look like a real couple. Arya's hands trembled. $300,000 for 5 days of work. Do you have a pen? She asked. He handed her a heavy, expensive one. She took a deep breath and signed her name. Her signature was shaky next to the formal print. When she dared to look up, Dante was watching her. He looked satisfied. Welcome to the family, he said. And for the first time in a long time, against all odds, Arya felt a small spark of hope. The moment the contract was signed, Dante stood. We should eat, he said. We have work to do. The enormous dining table was set for only two. An elegant, middle-aged woman with gray hair brought out several covered dishes. This is Maria, Dante said. She runs the household. Maria, this is Arya. Maria looked her over with a careful, assessing gaze. Finding nothing wrong, she gave a slight nod. Welcome. Lunch is served. The food was simple but perfect. Roasted chicken and fresh bread. Arya realized she was starving. She made herself eat slowly, trying to hide how new this all felt to her. Dante ate with purpose. He barely looked up from his phone. Tell me your story, he said. It felt like an invasion, but for $300,000, he deserved to know. I grew up in Queens, I said. My mom left when I was 6, so it was just me and my dad. He worked construction. I got a scholarship to NYU, but I didn't finish. He paused. No, I admitted. My dad got sick my junior year. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The insurance didn't cover everything, so I dropped out to work. He died in February. Dante finally looked up, his expression softer. I'm sorry. The bitterness in my voice was sharp. Sorry doesn't pay the medical bills. Dante nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. But grief is the same whether you're rich or poor. The way he said it made me look closer. You lost someone too. My mother, he said, putting his phone down. Car accident when I was 17. My father never got over it. He just exists now, drinking in his study. I'm sorry, I said, and I truly meant it. He gave a faint smile. See? It doesn't help much. Then he asked, Tell me about your father. The question surprised me. He was a good man, worked hard, told awful jokes, and always believed in me. My throat felt tight. He deserved better than to die drowning in debt. Dante's voice was quiet but firm. He left you with strength. That's worth more than any inheritance. You only say that because you have money. Fair point, he conceded. But a person with everything and no character has nothing. Your father gave you something real. After we ate, Dante led me to a large study. He took out a notebook. Now, he said, we create our history. My family will have questions. They spent the next 3 hours building a story. They had met 6 months ago at a charity event where she was catering. He was taken by her wit, and they began dating in secret. The marriage, just 3 weeks ago, was a sudden civil ceremony. They needed to tell the family now because his grandfather insisted on a Christmas gathering. Why get married so fast? I asked. Won't they be suspicious? It's romantic, Dante explained. My family loves a whirlwind courtship. My grandfather proposed after 2 weeks. But why would I marry you? I mean, you're so far out of my league. He studied me for a moment. You fell in love. You saw the man, not the money. You make me better. And I make you feel safe, he continued, something you haven't felt since your father passed. It sounded almost believable. What about being affectionate? I asked. We'll have to practice, he said. Nothing improper, just enough to be convincing. He stood and held out a hand. I walked toward him, my body tense. His hand was warm and surprisingly calloused. Relax, he murmured, his other hand gently finding my waist. Just breathe. Up close, I could see amber flecks in his dark eyes. He was tall and solid, but not intimidating. Better, he said. Now look at me like you love me. I can't just turn that on. Think about your dad, he suggested. Remember how he looked at you when he was proud. I pictured my father's smile, the pride in his eyes. I let that warmth fill me and looked up at Dante. His breath hitched. Perfect, he whispered. That's it. Hold that. We practiced for another hour, learning how to exist in each other's space. It was surprisingly easy. You're good at this, I noted. Not being creepy, I mean. He shrugged. Consent is simple. You ask, and you respect the answer. Then he pulled out his phone to show me pictures. We need to talk about the family, he said. This is my grandfather, Lorenzo Morelli. At 83, his grandfather Lorenzo was a force of nature who still controlled the family empire. Impressing him was everything. Dante showed me his photo, a man with piercing eyes and a stubborn jaw. He explained their business was real estate, owning a huge piece of the New York City skyline. Next was a picture of his father, Antonio, a ghost of a man with haunted eyes. Then his uncle, also named Lorenzo, and his wife Francesca. Dante's tone sharpened when he pointed to their son. He told me to watch out for Marco. The man in the image looked just like Dante, but his smile held a cruel edge. I asked what was wrong with him. He said Marco thinks the family name lets him do anything he wants, especially to women. He warned me to never be alone with any of them, because Marco was the primary reason for that rule. A chill went through me. I asked why someone like that was even allowed at family events. Dante explained that his grandfather believed blood was thicker than anything. The family closes ranks to protect its own, even those who do not deserve it. He promised to keep me safe, but I had to follow the rules. I agreed. We went through the rest of the family. Aunt Francesca was kind but nosy. Enzo was ambitious. Gabriella was sweet but shallow. It was a lot to take in. Dante told me to just focus on his grandfather, Marco, and Francesca. He then said we would leave the next day, and that I needed to pack nice clothes for 5 days. I told him I didn't own anything nice enough for his family. He expected that. He walked over to his desk and pulled out a credit card. He told me to buy what I needed. I stared at the card, unable to take it. He insisted it was part of the job, a business expense. He said I had to look like someone who could actually be his wife. I slowly reached out and took the heavy metal card. It felt unreal. He told me his assistant, Maria, would help me if I needed it. As I was leaving, I asked him why he was doing all this. Why pay $300,000 for a fake marriage? He paused for a moment. He said his grandfather was dying from cancer and had maybe 6 months left. His last wish was to see him settled and happy. He just wanted to give the old man some peace. The honesty of his answer hit me hard. I told him I was sorry. He gave a sad smile and said I was going to help him give his grandfather closure. The next morning, I stood in my apartment surrounded by luxury shopping bags. With Maria's help over the phone, I had spent hours in stores I had never dared to enter. My bed was covered in cashmere sweaters and silk blouses. I even had new luggage and a warm winter coat. Then there was the ring. Maria had met me at a private jeweler and pointed to a simple platinum band with a single diamond. It was beautiful, but it felt like a lie on my finger. My phone buzzed. It was Dante. His car was downstairs. I texted back that I would be right down, wondering who I was pretending to become. The drive north took 3 hours. The city faded into snow-covered hills. Dante sat beside me, quizzing me on our made-up history. I remembered every detail, from where he supposedly proposed on the Brooklyn Bridge to his favorite restaurant in the West Village. He finally looked up from his laptop. He told me I was a quick study. I replied that I had a good teacher. I asked if he was nervous. He said he was, a little. He had never brought a woman home before, so the family would have questions. I worried about messing up. He told me to stay calm and stick to the story. He reached over and took my hand, telling me to just remember that I loved him. He promised he would not let me fail. The estate was a massive stone mansion surrounded by acres of snow. It looked like something out of a dream. Dante called it the Morelli family compound, where Christmas comes to die. I couldn't help but laugh. As we pulled up to the front, my heart started pounding. Dante squeezed my hand. He told me to remember that I belong here because he says so. He said I was his wife, and I needed to act like it. The huge front door opened before we could even move. At the door, a woman with perfect hair and an empty smile greeted us. Dante, she said, kissing his cheeks. This must be Arya. His arm slid around my waist. My wife, Arya, he announced. This is my aunt, Francesca. Her eyes widened for a split second before the smile returned, tighter this time. Your wife? How wonderful. Come in. Everyone is waiting. The entry hall was enormous, dominated by a 20-foot Christmas tree. Francesca called out, Lorenzo, Dante is here. Footsteps approached, and the man from the photos appeared. Lorenzo Morelli, the family patriarch. Dante's voice was full of respect. Grandfather, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Arya, my wife. A heavy silence fell over the room. Lorenzo's sharp eyes moved between us. My hand found Dante's. Then, a genuine smile spread across Lorenzo's face. The old man's eyes lit up as he stepped forward with open arms. He exclaimed that his grandson finally brought home a wife. He gave Arya a warm hug that smelled rich and minty. He held her back to get a better look, his intense gaze making her nervous. But she smiled warmly, using acting skills she never knew she had. Lorenzo called her beautiful and intelligent, perfect for his grandson, Dante. He then asked Dante why he kept it a secret. Dante explained they married 3 weeks ago in a small ceremony. Francesca's sharp voice cut in, questioning how he could marry a girl he only knew for 6 months. Arya gently corrected her, saying it had been 7 months. She explained they met when she was waitressing at a charity event. It was a lie built on a little bit of truth. Lorenzo smiled, saying love has no rules. He shared that his own wife was a baker's daughter and they were married for 57 years. Dante changed the subject, asking where his cousins were. Francesca, still suspicious, said they were in the library. As they walked through the mansion, Arya felt overwhelmed. It was like a museum, with priceless art and gleaming furniture. In the library, 3 cousins looked up. One man with sharp eyes asked who Arya was. Dante introduced her as his wife. The room went completely silent. One cousin, Marco, stared at Arya with an intensity that made her shiver. He slowly repeated the word wife and crossed the room. He took her hand and kissed it. His eyes locked on hers. Dante's hand landed heavily on Marco's shoulder, his voice light but firm. He quickly excused them, saying Arya was tired. As they walked away, Arya could feel Marco's predatory gaze. She finally understood Dante's warnings. Their suite was enormous, bigger than her apartment. When Arya pointed out they were sharing a room, Dante promised to sleep on the sofa. He insisted on keeping things professional since this was just a business arrangement. He asked how she was doing. Arya admitted his cousin was creepy. She said Marco looked at her like he wanted to take her apart. Dante's face grew serious. He told her to stay away from Marco at all costs. He explained that Marco thinks rules do not apply to him. Dante promised to keep her safe, but she had to be careful. Just then, a knock announced dinner was in 30 minutes. The next 5 days felt like a trap. The dining room was massive, with a crystal chandelier and expensive place settings. 14 people, all dressed formally, gathered for the meal. Dante stayed close, seating her near his grandfather. The cousin Gabriella immediately started asking questions. She pointed out that Arya was a waitress at a fancy restaurant. The unspoken question was clear. Was she after their money? Arya felt her face get hot. She stated clearly that she married Dante for love, not money. Francesca then made a sarcastic comment about the upgrade from waitress to a member of their wealthy family. Lorenzo's sharp voice stopped the questioning. He insisted that Arya was now family. But it was too late. Arya felt them all judging her, thinking she was a gold digger. Gabriella then asked about the proposal. Following their script, Arya described a romantic proposal on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. She told them how Dante got down on one knee and she cried with joy. Gabriella thought it was incredibly romantic, but another cousin, Enzo, snorted that he would prefer a proper courtship. Lorenzo spoke up again, saying he knew his own wife for only 6 weeks before they married. He said that when you know, you just know. Hearing the kind old man speak about true love made Arya feel a deep sense of guilt. She was lying directly to the one person who believed in them. No, he is right, Marco said, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation. He stared directly at Arya from across the table, making her skin crawl. Sometimes you just know someone is meant for you. You feel it deep down, like fate. Dante's hand tightened on hers, a silent warning to stay calm. Arya and I were very lucky, Dante said smoothly, ending the uncomfortable moment. The talk turned to business, a world of deals and connections that felt completely foreign to Arya. She barely touched her food, thinking about how many long shifts at the diner this single meal would cost. Later, Lorenzo tapped his glass. "A toast," he announced, getting to his feet. "To my grandson Dante, and the brave woman who finally snagged him, and to Arya, who is now part of this family for better or worse." Soft laughter went around the table. Lorenzo's eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of warmth, but also a challenge. "We Morellis are not a simple family. We have traditions and a complicated past, but we are loyal to our own," he finished. "Welcome, my dear. I hope you bring my grandson the happiness he deserves." After dinner, in a huge living room with another giant Christmas tree, Arya found herself talking with Gabriella. "I know my sister Francesca was a lot to handle," Gabriella said in a low voice. "She is just very protective of Dante. He has been alone for a long time, and when he suddenly announced he was married, we were all stunned." "I get it," Arya replied. "If my cousin showed up married to a total stranger, I would be suspicious too." "You have cousins?" Gabriella asked. "No, I was an only child. It was just me and my dad." A wave of sadness washed over her. "He passed away earlier this year from cancer." "Oh, I am so sorry," Gabriella said, touching her arm gently. "That must have been awful. Well, at least you have Dante now. He is a good man, even if he is a little serious. He will take good care of you." Across the room, Arya watched Dante in a serious discussion with his grandfather. She worried Lorenzo was asking the very questions that could expose their entire plan. "Can I offer some advice?" Gabriella leaned in closer. "Be careful around Marco. He is charming, but he is also trouble. He does not respect boundaries, especially with women." "Dante already warned me," Arya admitted. "Good. Marco thinks marriage is a game. He has tried to get with half the wives in this family. Do not ever be alone with him. I am serious. He is dangerous." Just then, Marco himself sat in the chair opposite them, a fake smile on his face. "Ladies, what is the big secret?" "Your awful personality," Gabriella shot back sweetly. "We were just saying what a letdown you are." He ignored her, his eyes fixed on Arya. "Tell me, Arya, what does a waitress talk about with a man like Dante? Is it not a little challenging coming from such different worlds?" The insult was clear. Arya felt a flash of anger. "We talk about books, philosophy, and art," she said, her voice steady. "It turns out you do not need a bank account to have interesting thoughts." Marco's smile turned into a sneer. "A waitress with a sharp tongue. I see the appeal." "Marco." Dante's voice was like ice. He was standing beside his grandfather. "Leave her alone." "I was just getting to know my new cousin," Marco said, trying to look innocent. "I mind you cornering her," Dante said, walking over and placing himself between them. "Come on, honey. Grandpa wants to show us something." Lorenzo led them to his study. He pointed to an old black and white photo of a smiling young couple on their wedding day. "That is my Sophia," Lorenzo said softly. "Our wedding day. December 23rd, 1968. She was 19, and I was 21. Her father said I was trouble, that I would break her heart. He let out a sad chuckle. He was half right. I was trouble, but I loved her every single day until she died. His raw emotion made Arya's eyes well up. This was a true, lasting love, not the fantasy she and Dante were performing. She was beautiful, Arya said quietly. She was my whole world, Lorenzo replied, turning to them. I am dying. The doctors have given me about 6 months. He held up a hand to stop Dante's protest. Please do not. I have made peace with it. But I wanted to see my grandchildren settled. I need to know they will have love in their lives. His sharp eyes focused on Arya. Do you love my grandson? The question demanded honesty. Instead of the practiced lie, she told a version of the truth. I care for him very much, she said. He has been good to me and makes me feel safe. I want to make him happy. It was not a lie. Lorenzo gave a slow nod. Good enough. Love grows when you take care of it. My Sophia did not love me at first, you know. I won her over, day by day. He looked at Dante. Do not mess this up. Good women are rare. I know, Dante said. I will not. After leaving the study, Dante spoke quietly. You were great in there. He likes you, and that is half the battle. He knows something is off, Arya said. I could see it. Knowing and proving are two different things. As long as we stick to the story, we will be fine. Inside their room, he locked the door. Day 1 is done, with 4 more to go. Arya collapsed on the bed, feeling drained. Your family is exhausting. I have had 32 years of practice, Dante said, loosening his tie. You should rest. More family arrives tomorrow, which means more questions. But sleep did not come easily. Lying in the huge bed, she stared at the ceiling. Dante, she whispered. What happens if we fail? His voice was quiet but firm. We will not fail. We cannot. This is bigger than just losing money, Dante said, the sofa creaking as he sat up. If my family finds out I lied, the consequences will be severe. My grandfather's last memory of me will be a betrayal, and they will never trust me again. You will be caught in the middle. The reality of her situation settled over Arya. This was not a simple acting job. These people were powerful, and they held grudges. Her life could become very difficult. I am sorry, Dante said softly. I should not have put that on you. No, she said, pulling the covers to her chin. I needed to understand the stakes. We will make this work. We have to. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows. Arya woke to find Dante already dressed and working on his laptop. Morning, he said. Breakfast is at 9. The rest of the family arrives around noon. Arya checked her phone. 8:50. She had just enough time. The shower was a dream, with endless hot water and soap that smelled like heaven. She emerged feeling renewed, wrapping herself in a plush robe. Dante had laid out her clothes on the bed. A cashmere sweater and tailored pants they had chosen together. She dressed carefully and barely recognized the elegant woman in the mirror. With the right clothes, she could almost believe she belonged here. Breakfast was in a bright conservatory filled with plants. Lorenzo was there, along with a few others Dante introduced as distant family and friends. Sleep well? Lorenzo asked as they sat. Very well, thank you, Arya said, the lie coming more easily now. This was Dante's room as a boy, Lorenzo noted. Tell me, Arya, what are your plans now? Will you continue to work? The question was a test. She glanced at Dante, who gave her a slight nod. I have not decided yet, she said. I love my work, but I also want to support Dante. A wise answer, Lorenzo said. A true partner is worth more than any business deal. His sincere words felt like a sting of guilt. She was helping deceive this man about the very thing he valued most. The morning passed in a blur of polite conversation as more family arrived. Her cheeks hurt from smiling as she tried to remember all the new names. At noon, A line of cars pulled up the driveway. The house erupted in chaos as cousins, children, and elderly relatives poured inside. The full Morelli family was gathering. "Here we go," Dante whispered beside her. "The real test begins." They joined the crowd in the entrance hall. Dante's father, Antonio, made a brief, cold appearance before retreating to his study. Francesca, however, was in her element, directing everyone with skill. "Dante!" A woman rushed forward to embrace him. "My beautiful boy, and this must be the mystery wife." "Aunt Teresa," Dante said with genuine affection, "this is Arya." Teresa pulled Arya into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "Welcome. I cannot believe Dante got married without inviting me." "It was all very sudden," Arya explained. "Nonsense," Teresa said, assessing her with kind eyes. "But you are lovely." "Good. Dante needs someone lovely." The afternoon was a storm of activity. Children ran through the halls while adults talked and laughed loudly. Dante kept Arya close, his hand always on her back, a silent reminder she was not alone. They told their story again and again until it started to feel real. But Marco was always there, watching her from the edges of the crowd. His constant stare made her skin crawl. He never approached her directly, but his presence was a heavy weight. Late in the afternoon, Arya excused herself, grateful for a moment of peace. The hallway was quiet, muffling the noise of the party. She found the bathroom and locked herself inside, leaning against the cool sink and taking deep breaths. She could do this. When she came out, Marco was waiting in the hall. Her heart jumped. They were alone. "Excuse me," she said, trying to move around him. He shifted, blocking her path. "No need to rush. I wanted to talk to you properly." "Dante does not hover," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You know," Marco said, taking a step closer. Arya stepped back, her shoulders hitting the wall. "I think this whole marriage is a lie. Something just does not add up." "I do not care what you think," Arya said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Now move." "Or what?" he challenged. "You are pretty, I will give you that, but you are not Dante's type. He likes sophisticated women, not waitresses playing dress-up." The words stung, echoing her own fears, but she lifted her chin. "You do not know anything about Dante. Get out of my way, or I will scream loud enough for everyone to hear." Marco laughed, but he stepped aside. "Relax. I am just getting to know my new cousin. But here is some advice. This family eats people like you for breakfast. You will never be one of us." He walked away, leaving her shaking. She waited until her breathing returned to normal before heading back to the party. Dante found her immediately, his eyes full of concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," she lied. "Just tired." But he knew she was not telling the truth. His jaw tightened. "Did someone say something to you?" She thought about telling Dante about Marco, but that would just cause a fight. It was better to stay alert and handle it herself. "I am fine," she lied with a smile. "It is just a lot to take in." Dante watched her for a moment, then agreed. "Okay, but if anyone makes you feel uncomfortable, you tell me. That is not negotiable. I promise." Dinner was another huge event with 20 people at the table. Marco watched her with that unsettling smile, so she kept her eyes on her plate or on Dante. Afterward, Lorenzo stood with great effort, and the room went quiet. "Tomorrow is Christmas Eve," he announced, his frail voice surprisingly strong. "This will be my last one." He waved away their protests. "We will not pretend. I am at peace. I have lived a good life and I have loved. I have built something that will last. But love is what matters in the end." His eyes swept across the table, finally resting on Dante and Arya. "I see hope for all of you. Your family is everything. Never forget that." The weight of his words felt like a physical blow to Arya. She was lying to a dying man whose only wish was to see his family happy. Later, as Dante pretended to sleep on the sofa, she wondered what kind of person she had become. The kind who lies for money during a man's last Christmas. The kind who stays silent about someone like Marco to protect a deal. I can hear you thinking, Dante said from the darkness. I cannot sleep. Me neither. The sofa creaked. Want to talk? I do not know, she said, sitting up. Your grandfather is dying, and we are lying to him. Does that not bother you? After a moment of silence, Dante rose and crossed the room to sit on the edge of her bed. Every single day, he said softly. Each time he looks at us with hope or talks about love and family, I feel like a monster. Then why are we doing this? She asked. Because telling him the truth would be worse. Admitting that I am so broken I will die alone, just like my father, would destroy him. This lie gives him peace. So what happens after? Arya wondered. After he is gone, we will say it did not work out. A quiet divorce. The gossip will fade. What matters is that he dies believing I found happiness, that I am not alone. Her question hung in the air. Are you alone, Dante? Is that why this was so easy, because there is no one to question it? Yes, he admitted. I work 80 hours a week building an empire. I come home to an empty apartment and tell myself it is fine, that I do not need anyone. He laughed without humor. It turns out it is easier to hire a wife than to risk letting someone inside. His honesty was disarming, and she found herself matching it. I understand. After my father passed, I shut everything down too. It is easier to just work than to feel how alone you really are. Maybe we are not so different, she added. Just two broken people pretending to be whole. Dante met her eyes. Maybe that is why this works. We understand each other. He stood and moved toward the sofa. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. The hardest day is still coming. The next morning she awoke to falling snow. Dante was gone, but he had left a note on the table. Family breakfast at 8. Traditional chaos. Stay close to me. The last words made her stomach tighten. She dressed in a green sweater dress, adding the pearl earrings and the wedding ring that still felt like a costume. 3 days ago, she had signed a contract. Now, she was playing a part. The breakfast room was a storm of noise and activity. Children darted between adults, and Italian was shouted across the table. Arya hesitated, feeling lost, until Dante's Aunt Teresa spotted her. There she is. Come sit with me. Dante was suddenly at her side, his hand finding her back in a now familiar gesture. Morning, he murmured, kissing her temple. It looked completely natural. Better than I expected, Arya replied, surprised it was true. Their conversation had shifted things, creating a fragile understanding. They moved through the buffet line, grabbing plates of food. Arya sat between Dante and a cousin named Lucia, who asked about their sudden wedding plans. We have not had time to think about it, Arya said. Everything happened so fast. That is how romance is, Lucia said with a smile. My husband and I eloped 20 years ago. Francesca watched them from across the table, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Arya met her gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. The silent challenge was clear. After breakfast, the family gathered to decorate their enormous Christmas tree. Lorenzo explained their oldest tradition. Each person hangs one ornament, something that represents what matters to them. Enzo chose a small golden scale. Gabriella added a tiny Eiffel Tower. When it was Marco's turn, he held up a chess piece, a knight. For those of us who believe in strategy, he said, his eyes locking with Arya's. The hidden threat made her skin crawl. Dante's hand tightened around hers in silent support. Dante and Arya, Lorenzo called out. You are up! Dante stepped forward, holding a simple glass heart. For love, he said, looking at his grandfather. The old man nodded, then his gaze shifted to Arya. She felt her pulse quicken. He expected her to say something too. Taking the ornament, she spoke, her voice surprisingly steady. My father used to say that love is about showing up every day, choosing to stay when things get hard. That is what this means to me. When she turned back from the tree, Lorenzo was smiling, his eyes wet with tears. Your father, he said softly, was a very wise man. Later that day, the house was busy with dinner preparations. Dante had to join the men in the study for their traditional cigars and whiskey. It is expected, he said. Will you be okay? I will be fine, Arya promised him. She was wrong. The women had gathered for tea, and Francesca immediately began an interrogation. Her questions were like surgical tools, designed to expose any lie. So, you met at a charity gala? She began. Which one exactly? The Children's Hospital, Arya answered calmly. The spring fundraiser. And you were working as a caterer? Yes. I sometimes take catering shifts. Francesca's smile was razor sharp. And Dante just happened to notice you? He spilled wine on his jacket. I helped him get the stain out, Arya explained, maintaining eye contact. Then we started talking and found out we loved the same French novels. French novels? Gabriella asked, suddenly interested. Camus, mostly, Arya said, using a real detail she and Dante had discovered about each other. Lucia laughed. That sounds like Dante. But Francesca was not done. Tell me about the proposal again. So Arya told the story once more, adding small, believable details she pulled from movies and her imagination, making it feel authentic. I was crying too hard to speak, Arya finished, smiling at the invented memory. Dante had to ask me 3 times if I was saying yes. The women laughed, and for a moment, even Francesca's smile seemed genuine. He pays attention, Arya added, surprising herself with the need to defend him. He really listens. This part was true. Over the past few days, Dante had been a true partner. You really love him, a cousin named Teresa said softly. It is easy to love him, Arya replied, shocked to realize she meant it. Just then, the conservatory door opened, and Marco strolled in, his smile predatory. Ladies, please do not stop on my account. This is a private conversation, Marco, Francesca said sharply. I just wanted to borrow my new cousin, he purred, his eyes on Arya. I found some of Dante's childhood photos in the library. Alarm bells screamed in her head. The library was isolated, exactly where Dante had warned her not to go with him. How sweet, Arya said lightly. Could you bring them here? The album is too heavy. Come on, it will just take a minute, Marco insisted. Unless you are afraid to be alone with me. The room grew tense. As he reached for her, Gabriella suddenly stood up. Actually, I would love to see those pictures too. I will come with you both. Relief washed through Arya. Marco's jaw tightened. Gabriella linked arms with Arya and said, Family first, right? Gabriella's tight grip led Arya from Marco's trap. In the library, with no album in sight, Gabriella dropped her act. She knew Marco's game was to get Arya alone. He was dangerous. Arya promised to be careful, grateful for the unexpected ally in this tense family. Arya rushed to Dante, explaining Marco's ploy and Gabriella's help. Dante's fury was cold. He wanted to end him. She calmed him, asking only for protection. He promised more. During dinner, Marco's predatory stare never left her, a constant, chilling pressure from across the table. Lorenzo's dinner speech was heavy with emotion. He spoke of his age, urging them to value family above all else. His words moved everyone. He raised a glass to the family, to love. Afterwards, the night filled with carols, a charming children's play, and simple gifts. Dante's gift, a rare book, felt deeply personal. Her simple bookmark for him was received with quiet thanks. Later, a drunk Marco demanded a dance with his wife. Dante refused flatly. Marco sneered, questioning their sham marriage and insulting Arya, calling her an unworthy waitress. Dante's anger exploded. He slammed Marco against a wall, his threat a deadly whisper. Only Lorenzo's sharp command stopped him. The old man demanded to know why they were fighting on Christmas Eve. Dante explained coldly that Marco had disrespected his wife and he would not tolerate it. Marco played the victim, but Dante exposed his stalking. Lorenzo turned to Gabriella, who confirmed Marco tried to isolate Arya in the library. His guilt sealed, Lorenzo ordered a furious Marco to his study. The family tension broke, and Dante immediately checked on a shaken Arya. "You are my wife. In this family, that means something, real or not. It means I defend you." The raw protectiveness in his voice warmed something inside her chest. This was more than their agreement. This was Dante, genuinely angry for her, ready to fight his own family to protect her. "Thank you," she whispered. The party wound down soon after. Upstairs, with the door locked, Dante collapsed onto the sofa. "I lost my temper. I never do that. He provoked you. That is no excuse. I let him see he could use you to hurt me." Dante looked up, his expression pained. "Do you know why I was so angry? It was not just about protecting you. It was because he was right. This whole arrangement is a lie. You are an acquisition, someone I hired, and I have been pretending it is something more. I have been possessive over someone who is not really mine." "Maybe it started that way," Arya said, sitting beside him. "But it has changed, has it not? We are not strangers anymore." "No," Dante agreed. "We are not. Thinking of him hurting you, I was furious. You are under my protection. I take that seriously." "I know," she said, and then she took his hand. "For what it is worth, I do not feel like an acquisition. I feel like I matter to you. This strange friendship we have, it feels real to me." He looked from their joined hands to her face. "You are making this complicated. Life is complicated. My father taught me you just have to keep going. You show up and you find joy where you can." She squeezed his hand. "These last few days, even with the lies and the fear, there have been good moments. Your grandfather's stories, Gabriella's kindness, even this. It is not all bad." "No," Dante said softly. "It is not all bad." The final minutes of Christmas Eve were ticking away. Outside, snow fell, covering the estate in a thick white blanket. They had 2 more days of pretending, then they could escape back to their separate lives. But sitting next to Dante, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, Arya wondered what her life would be like after this was over. Would they become strangers again? Or could this fragile connection they had built survive the truth? Dante finally spoke. "We should sleep," he said, but he did not let go of her hand. "We should," she agreed, but did not move. The clock chimed midnight, welcoming Christmas Day. In a borrowed mansion, Arya sat with the man she was paid to love and realized her heart had gone completely off script. Christmas morning arrived with pale sunlight. Arya woke up on the sofa, her head on Dante's shoulder, his arms securely around her waist. They were tangled together in a way that felt both perfectly natural and absolutely terrifying. She moved slightly and his eyes opened. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, only inches apart. "Merry Christmas," Dante whispered. "Merry Christmas." She began to pull away, but he held her for a second longer before finally letting her go. They moved apart carefully, suddenly aware of the boundaries that had vanished in the night. She had to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. Developing real feelings was not part of their deal. A knock at the door saved them from the silence. It was Teresa. "Lorenzo wants everyone downstairs in an hour," she called. "He has an important announcement." Breakfast was a quiet affair. Marco and his parents were gone. "I sent Marco home," Lorenzo announced, his voice weak but clear. His behavior toward Arya was unacceptable. He turned to Arya, his eyes serious. "On behalf of our family, I apologize. You are one of us now." The simple, sincere apology brought a lump to Arya's throat. "Thank you," she managed to say. Lorenzo then looked at Dante. "I am proud of you for defending your wife. A man protects what is most important." Dante just nodded, his hand finding hers under the table. The touch was becoming a familiar comfort. After the tense meal, the mood lightened as children opened their gifts with joyful screams. The adults exchanged their own presents, and Arya was surprised to receive several. Francesca, who had been hostile before, gave her a bottle of wine. "I was wrong about you," she said stiffly. "Dante clearly loves you, and that is enough for me." This should have felt like a victory. Instead, Arya was crushed by guilt. All these people were welcoming her into their lives, and it was all based on a huge lie. Later, she and Dante escaped to their room. "One last day," Dante said. "Then this performance ends." He was about to reveal a secret, but a knock interrupted them. It was his grandfather, Lorenzo. "I am 83 years old," the old man stated. "I am not a fool." Arya froze, her heart pounding. They were caught. Lorenzo admitted he was suspicious of their sudden marriage. But then he saw how Dante defended her. He saw the real care in their quiet glances. "It does not matter how this started," he said. He saw two people learning to trust, to build something true. "You are falling in love." Dante took her hand. Lorenzo knew he brought her here for his sake. "It worked," the old man said, "because I see my grandson finally letting someone in." He then revealed the truth. "The cancer is winning. I will die happy, knowing you have a chance. Make it real." "Take the money," he told Arya, "but consider staying with him." After he left, Dante finally spoke. "I do not want you to leave. My life was empty before." She said they barely knew each other. So he listed the little things he had noticed, from her strength to her kindness. He told her their marriage papers were real. "Why not make the rest real too?" he asked. He gently touched her face, his voice soft. "I am falling for you, Arya, and I think you are falling for me too." She looked at him and saw the man who had saved her in every way. "I am terrified," she whispered. "Me too," Dante replied. He confessed his flaws, but promised to protect her and be worthy of this chance. Arya thought of her lonely past versus a future where his presence made her feel safe. She thought about his smile and how it made her feel home. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dante pulled back to look into her eyes. "Okay, let's try to make this real." Tears of pure hope welled up in her eyes. "I do not know how to be part of your world," she confessed, "but I promise I will be honest with you, and I will try." A huge smile transformed his face. "Yeah," he breathed. Then, because words were not enough, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first, but then his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. It deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, she felt dizzy with happiness. "We should probably tell everyone," Dante murmured into her hair, "that we are staying together for real." "They think we are already together for real," she pointed out. "True," he said with a laugh, "but now we actually mean it. My grandfather is going to be unbearable. He will claim he knew this would happen all along." "He did know all along," she replied. "That is going to make him even worse." They held each other for a long time, just listening to the happy sounds of family. For a few moments, they could just be themselves. In his study, Lorenzo looked weary but resolute. He held out an envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "This is for you," he said. His voice was soft. "It's my written blessing. It states that I witnessed your love, and anyone who questions it will have to answer to me." He explained that he knew his other grandson, Marco, would cause trouble. "He will say this was all for the money. This letter will protect you." Dante accepted it, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," was all he could manage. Lorenzo smiled faintly. "No, thank you. You've given an old man peace." Turning to Arya, he made a simple request. "Take care of him. He acts tough, but he needs your kindness." "I will," she promised, and she meant it completely. 3 days later, the call came. Lorenzo had passed away. Dante received the news in silence, then sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. Arya simply held him, offering her strength as his quiet grief finally broke free. The funeral was enormous, a final tribute to a great man. Through it all, Arya stood by Dante's side, his hand holding hers like an anchor. Later, a surprise came from Dante's aunt, Francesca. With tears in her eyes, she approached Arya. "He loved you," she said. "Thank you for making him so happy." "He was easy to love," Arya replied honestly. Francesca nodded. "Keep loving my son, he needs it." The weeks that followed were a quiet adjustment. Dante dove into managing his grandfather's affairs. Arya moved into the penthouse for good, paid off her debts, and enrolled in online classes to finish her degree. The constant worry about money was gone, which felt both wonderful and strange. She and Dante fell into a comfortable rhythm. They shared quiet dinners and learned each other's habits. It was a real marriage being built, not on grand passion, but on a foundation of genuine care and quiet moments. 3 months after Lorenzo's death, his will was read. As predicted, Marco challenged it, claiming the marriage was a sham. But Lorenzo's letter, penned in his own steady hand, immediately shut down the legal fight. Lorenzo had left most of his fortune to the family, but he created a special trust just for Dante and Arya. It wasn't cash, it was property. "He gave us 3 buildings," Dante said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked over the documents. He pointed to one address, and Arya's eyes went wide. It was the restaurant building. "He bought it 6 months ago," Dante said in amazement. He knew. Somehow, he knew. They visited the old restaurant, a place full of memories. Standing where she once served tables, Arya had an idea. "We could reopen it," she said, "make it something new. A community kitchen to give people a second chance." Dante agreed instantly. "Let's build something real to honor him." That night, lying together in bed, Arya traced circles on his chest. It was amazing how much their lives had changed. They had gone from total strangers to a fake couple, and now this, all in just a few short months. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked softly. "Saying yes to my insane plan?" "Every single day," she replied, smiling when he tensed up. "I'm terrified this is all a dream, but I have never regretted it." "I am scared too," he admitted, "that I'll fall back into my old ways." She propped herself on an elbow to face him. "Then we will just have to be scared together. Your grandfather was right. It is not about how we started, it is about the choice we make now." "I choose you," Dante said, pulling her into a kiss. "Every day, for as long as you will have me." 6 months later, they stood before their family and friends to renew their vows, this time for real. Gabriella, her maid of honor, cried happy tears. Teresa officiated the ceremony, her voice filled with hope. It was a small affair in the estate's garden on a perfect spring day. The family was there simply to celebrate. Even Dante's father, Antonio, emerged from his study, offering a rare smile. When they were pronounced husband and wife, truly this time, Dante kissed her with an intensity that felt both new and ancient. As their family and friends cheered, Arya allowed herself to believe in happy endings. The reception was a blur of dancing, laughter, and emotional toasts. Later, she stepped into the garden for a breath of fresh air. She stood near the memorial bench they had built for Lorenzo. The plaque read, "Love is the foundation. Build well." "We are trying," she whispered to the quiet night. "We are really trying." A year after that first Christmas, they returned to the estate with an announcement. The whole family gathered in the living room where their strange journey had first begun. "We wanted to tell you all together," Dante began, his arm securely around Arya. "The community center is opening in January. We are calling it Casa Sofia, after my grandmother." The family erupted in cheers and questions, but Arya held up a hand for silence. "There is something else," she said, a smile playing on her lips. She took Dante's hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We are going to need a nursery in the penthouse by summer." A moment of stunned silence was broken by Teresa's joyful shriek as she rushed to hug them both. The room exploded with excitement. Through it all, Dante held Arya close, not even trying to hide his happy tears. That night, Arya thought about the desperate girl she had been just 1 year ago, spilling dessert on a stranger. She had walked into a deal expecting a simple transaction. She never could have imagined finding this kind of love, this family, or that she would be carrying his child. You know what is funny? Dante whispered. If you had not dropped that tray, we would still be strangers. Arya laughed. Then thank goodness I am clumsy, and thank goodness you were brave. And thank goodness for grandfathers who could see our future, he added, his hand resting on her stomach. Outside, snow began to fall, just as it had on that first night. But this time, Arya was not playing a part. She was not hiding. She was simply herself, loved and safe. The contract that started it all was long gone, replaced by promises made from the heart. Their love had grown from the strangest of beginnings into something beautiful and strong. In the end, she learned that the man she thought would trap her was the one who set her free. He showed her that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards, and that a desperate gamble can become the foundation of your entire world. Love had found her in the last place she ever thought to look, in a ruined suit, a business card, and a voice on the phone that changed her life forever. She had answered that call. She had taken the leap, and she had found her way home. Model. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.